A look back at the Atlantic's busiest hurricane season ever. 30 named storms, including 13 hurricanes over the course of 2020. An update on the tropics and a live Q&A with our meteorologist begins now here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. JB Buno here with you live in our hurricane headquarters for what we expect to be our final regularly scheduled episode or regularly scheduled live stream of Tracking the Tropics. Joining us once again on the right side of your screen, WKRG Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth joining us from Mobile, Alabama. Great to have Ed on the program. If you would like to ask us a question, we're going to be looking in the Facebook Live comment section for your questions, the ones that have hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyEd, or hashtag HeyJulie. Julie Phillips standing by at the wall with the very latest here on the tropics and a look back at what was a crazy, wild, unpredictable, and busy 2020 hurricane season. Hey there, Julie.
Hey, JB. It was an incredibly busy hurricane season. The most named storms we've had ever in the history. So it was a very active season right now. Thankfully, things are finally starting to calm down. The official end of hurricane season is November 30th. Not to say that we couldn't actually see something pop up after November 30th, but that's the official end of hurricane season, and things are really starting to look quieter now. You can see on our satellite imagery across the Atlantic, we've had a lot of fronts starting to get going now. The waters are cooler, so there's only one area that we're watching, and it looks pretty unlikely that this will develop. It's right now to the southeast of Bermuda. There's only a 20% chance of maybe a subtropical system developing in the next couple of days. This is associated with the frontal boundary right now, an area of low pressure, but it's just not organized, and it doesn't really look like it probably will get organized. Regardless of that, it will be moving away from us, so not a concern here in the U.S., but we're going to keep watching it, of course, for you. November is typically a very quiet month in the tropics. We maybe see a storm, 2 at most. Oftentimes we don't see any storms at all in November. This year we did see several though, and when we do look for development in November, we kind of look closer to Cuba as we look over towards the islands. Again, this is an area that maybe still has some of the warmer waters. We can still see some development get going, but really in November things start to quiet down. We get more into a quiet season. Sea surface temperatures are beginning to drop many spots. You can see in the Gulf, not what we were looking at just a few months ago when we had those readings in closer to 90 in the low 90s. Right now, 78 as you look south of Mobile, Alabama, where Ed is. You can see some 80-degree readings still out there, but we are starting to see things cooling off a bit. 2020, though, was a record-breaking season. In an average year, to put it in perspective for you, we see 12 named storms. The forecasts were for a very busy season, and it turned to be out even busier than we had expected. And in 2020, we had 30 named storms so far. In an average year, we only have 6 hurricanes, and that's active enough. This year, we had 13 hurricanes. Typically, we have 3 major hurricanes in an average season. We had 6 major hurricanes this year, and a major hurricane is going to be a Category 3 storm or greater. So we did have some significant storms that developed. Here's a look at our 2020 U.S. landfall. So these are all of the systems that impacted the U.S. this year, and you can really see that the northern Gulf Coast got the brunt of the action. Thankfully, in the Tampa Bay area where we are in Florida, we didn't see as much activity, but along the northern Gulf Coast, we saw several systems. So I want to bring in Ed Bloodsworth. Ed Bloodsworth used to work with us here at WFLA, and now he's in Mobile, Alabama. And Ed, you dealt with several of these systems. Is there one out of all 5 of these that really impacted the Mobile, Alabama area the most?
Yeah, you have to go back to Sally, the Category 2 storm, and with that one, it was just such a slow mover. I mean, we had some areas pick up almost 30 inches of rain. Of course, we had Cristobal, a tropical storm before that. Marco wasn't that major of a system. But then you go back to Zeta, that late season system, which also the eye actually passed through some of our northernmost communities there, also making landfall as a Category 2. So as you mentioned, I mean, 9 landfalls alone on the Gulf Coast is quite a hyperactive season, to say the least.
Absolutely. And again, 13 U.S. landfalls, 6 of those were hurricanes. Really not a season that we want to see happen anytime again soon. So we are happy to see the 2020 hurricane season come to an end. So we're going to recap it for you, kind of showing you month by month to bring you back. It seems like an incredibly long year, right? Hard to believe that all these storms were from the same season. We had Bertha, which was a tropical storm, which made landfall in South Carolina. Arthur stayed out to sea. Then we had June. Things started to get a little bit busier. Not too bad, though. We had Cristobal and Dolly. Cristobal did make a U.S. landfall as a tropical storm there. July is when we really started to see things heating up, and that's kind of when we knew that we might be in for a rough season. We had Faye, Isaias, we had Hannah that affected Texas, Gonzalo, we had Edward out in the open Atlantic. So 5 named storms, 3 of those were U.S. landfalls. August is typically when we would start to see things heating up. So we really started this year a little bit earlier. And you can see in August we had several systems, probably most notably Laura. Laura made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane in Louisiana. So this was a major hurricane. It did a lot of damage along the northern Gulf Coast from the system along the Louisiana coastline. We also had Marco, which was a tropical storm, brought some flooding. And then Kyle and Josephine, of course, didn't affect us. Laura, though, was definitely a storm that folks along the northern Gulf Coast will remember. Then we had September. September is the peak of hurricane season. This is when we see the most storms develop, and that was no different this year. Maybe we didn't see quite as many U.S. landfalls, but we had 10 named storms develop in September. You can see several of those stayed out in the Atlantic, which was good news. You got Teddy, Omar, Paulette, Renee, Vicky. Some of these you probably didn't even remember formed because they didn't have any U.S. impacts. But as Ed mentioned earlier, we did have Sally, which made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane in the northern Gulf Coast. This was the one that moved in close to the Gulf Shores area of Alabama, and this system did bring some storm surge issues and a good bit of flooding as well. And I know Sally was really one for you guys that you mentioned really impacted you. What kind of impacts did you see in your local viewing area there?
Yeah, Sally, we knew was just going to be a major storm for our region, even a couple days out, just because we knew it was going to slow down so much. So we brought Category 2 force winds. We had some of our wind gusts clocked at around 110. Some areas had gusts approaching 115. But the storm surge got about 10 to 12 feet in some areas, mainly in northwest Florida. But just the slow movement, it took really almost a full 24 hours for that system to finally start picking up forward speed, and the flooding that we saw was just tremendous. Not only the day of or the night of the landfall, we actually had some of our reporters calling in saying they were having to get rescued because their streets in front of them were turning into rivers. And then we actually had significant river flooding afterward, and we had a lot of boats. As you know, what happens with that kind of surge, the boats get displaced. We had many boats that were displaced inland, a lot of wind damage. So Sally, may not have been the major hurricane, but a high impact event nonetheless.
Yeah, a high impact event. That's a good way to put it, because we have some of these systems that even if they're a tropical storm can really bring some big impacts. So it all just depends on the storms and how it affects the areas that it hits. So September, very, very busy season. And then we head into October, which can be busy. We can see a good bit of activity. We certainly saw that this year. We had 4 named storms, and that's when we decided to enter the Greek alphabet. 2 of those were U.S. landfalling hurricanes. And I think at this point is when Ed was really kind of wondering what was going on, because we had 2 more landfalling systems in the northern Gulf Coast. 2 of those in Louisiana, which is really remarkable at this point. We also had Gamma and Epsilon, but Delta and Zeta made landfalls as hurricanes in Louisiana. Ed, I know this was a little bit farther west from you, but I'm sure that you talked to, people in your area that had friends and families. I mean, by October, what were people kind of thinking with how active things were and with so many of the storms impacting this region?
Well, Delta was very interesting because I remember seeing that forecast track, and we kept thinking, is there a chance that this thing comes right on shore where Laura made landfall as a Category 4 early in the season? I went to Lake Charles 2 weeks after Laura made landfall, and I'll tell you what, I mean, the entire city, parts of the city looked like a war zone. I mean, you had trees down, power lines down, in buildings. I mean, you had so much damage. So the thought of having another Cat 4 hit that same area, and that's unfortunately what happened. And then Zeta, as you mentioned, October, we always kind of talk about this secondary peak that occurs in the season, and that does happen in October, and we tend to see these Gulf cyclones. And Zeta was a very unique storm in the fact that not only the fact that we're going all the way into the Greek alphabet, but also this system was a very fast mover. And so the rain really wasn't a big issue, but it was the wind that provided a tremendous amount of damage. You had numerous trees down, and the power outage situation was absolutely immense. And that stretched all the way from Louisiana, but all the way into central and northern Alabama and into northern Georgia. It carried with it tropical storm force winds all the way into the Carolinas. So again, it was a different kind of storm. And that's why we always say from year to year, it's hard to compare one storm to the other because the speed makes a difference. The impact zone makes a difference. The time of year that they make impact makes a difference. But just quite a story that unfolded there, especially as you mentioned, August, September, October this year. That stretch we will not forget for quite some time.
Absolutely. And it's always interesting to hear the different impacts from each storm, like you mentioned, Ed. It doesn't really matter exactly what category a hurricane is or if it's a tropical storm. Every storm kind of has its own story and how it impacts it, depending on how it hits, how quickly it's moving, how strong the winds are, how much rain you see from it. So really zoning in on those local impacts is always important whenever there's a storm approaching. November. So here we are, November, thinking things are going to get quieter. They didn't quite get quieter. We actually had 3 named storms so far this November. We had Theta. Thankfully, that was a non-issue, staying out to sea. We had Iota. Iota made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane in mid to late November in Central America, causing massive flooding there. We also have Eta, which hit the same area as a Category 2 hurricane just about 2 weeks prior. And after Eta moved on land, you actually see this interesting track. It moved back out into the Caribbean. It redeveloped. It moved over Cuba, redeveloped again, made a landfall near the Keys, and then another landfall just north of the Tampa Bay area as a tropical storm. But it brought, again, some storm surge issues to the Tampa Bay area. We saw 2 to 4 feet of flooding. So we still are doing stories in our area, in the Tampa Bay area, where I'm at right now, where we do still have some people where they're dealing with some of that storm surge flooding. Saw a good bit of rain in some inland spots as well. But really, I think that coastal flooding is what folks that live along the Tampa Bay area coastline will remember from Eta. And again, here we are. Can't completely rule out any more storms forming, but at this point, we've had 30 named storms, and we are officially kind of heading toward the end of hurricane season, which is a good thing. All of us very happy about that. Again, we've got those 30 storms in total. As we kind of put those on one by one, you can really just see the real impact of this season. So we would not like to see another season like this in a while. We'll just have to see what next year brings. But for now, we know that things are beginning to wrap up, quieting down. The waters are getting cooler. We're seeing stronger cold fronts make their way farther south. So all of us in the meteorology world are happy about that until hurricane season begins again. Had some interesting numbers from the National Hurricane Center. They put together not only the number of storms, but they conducted 86 hurricane hunter missions this year. 102 hurricane eyewall passages. They were in flight for 678 hours, and they dropped over 1,700 drop sounds in those systems. Also, they launched 47 underwater hurricane gliders, also taking some measurements. And this was the 5th consecutive hurricane season with above normal activity. So yes, really an intense season. We went through all of these names, our typical names, and then moved into the Greek alphabet as well. So it was an incredible year. And it really was just one that, you know, the most storms we have ever seen. If you want to kind of talk about just what your thoughts are on that and how maybe it affected some folks and what they think of in your area in terms of preparations, things like that for next season.
Yeah, you know, I think there's definitely a lot of lessons to take away from a season, especially when we go through and do this sort of post-season analysis. You know, again, seasonal forecasting, we knew this was going to be an above-average year, but, you know, just to get 30 named storms, I remember, you know, living in Florida in the 2005 season, and, you know, we had 28 named storms that year, and that just seemed unfathomable that we would ever even come close to that again. And then now, of course, this year we end up getting to 30. So The one thing that we always kind of say, and we always press every single year, is that you always have to prepare every single season as if it's going to be a season like this. Hopefully we never see something like this again, but you always need to prepare as if it's going to be an active season. The other thing I think a lot of folks need to realize that we had two instances where we had the same areas get impacted by significant storms. Again, you mentioned Laura and Delta. In this part of the Gulf Coast, we had Sally and Zeta. Of course, we also had Cristobal earlier in the year. Then, of course, you go down into Central America, Eta followed by Iota. And, it just goes to show you that, we always say all it takes is one storm, but now we had a situation where, the same community saw multiple storms, and not just multiple storms, but multiple significant storms. So there's a lot to learn in a season like this, that you always need to keep your guard up. In this case, we started in May and then all the way through November. But like you said, even into December, we can get late season tropical cyclones. And like you said, I just hope we never have to see another season like this. But, hats off to the hurricane and all the work there in Lakeland. I know at Lakeland Linder and up here at Keesler Air Force Base, we've got the Air Force hurricane hunters here, and boy, hats off to the work that they've done helping us to stay ahead of these incredible storms this season.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Ed Bloodsworth joining us here from Mobile, Alabama, WKRG's chief meteorologist. Julie Phillips there beneath me. You see the hashtags there on the right side of your screen. We're going to start to take questions now from Facebook Live to answer some of the questions that you have at home, wherever you are watching from. But really, this spaghetti plot, can we call this a spaghetti plot? Because this is the end-all, be-all of all spaghetti plots here. All 30 storms, I believe, are on the screen, right, Julie?
Yes, that's all the tracks of all 30 of the storms. Now, spaghetti plots is typically, just the different tracks we expect a storm to take. So our end of the season graphs typically don't look this exciting. Yeah. But, hey, 2020.
Yeah, I'll give it to you. You took a handful of spaghetti and just threw it at the screen. I understand there, but that's quite a season.
It looks like a 2 or a 3-year-old just got a crayon and just started drawing random squiggly lines all over the place. That's the kind of 2020 that we have had thus far. JB Buno, Ed Bloodsworth, Julie Phillips. We're going to start to take your questions here in a meteorologist Q&A. You can use the hashtags Hey Ed, hashtag Hey Julie, hashtag Hey JB. We'll be looking for your questions here in the Facebook Live comment section. We've seen a lot of them come in already, like this one here from Nancy Chatham Lyons, hashtag Hey JB. Is it safe to celebrate the season is over yet, Julie?
I think it's safe to go ahead and say, the official end is November 30th, and we're really not going to see anything develop before then. So I think it's safe to go ahead and celebrate. But we just want to make mention that November 30th, there's no reason that something can't develop after that. Occasionally it happens, and I think we're all in agreement that it wouldn't be the most shocking thing if something like that happened this year. Hopefully it wouldn't be something, though, that impacted anyone, would be out in the Atlantic. So I think it's safe to, if you live along the coast, to be happy that this season has ended.
Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Our friends at the Climate Prediction Center, they put out these long-range outlooks, and it does look like we're starting to get I don't want to say complete shutdown, but tropical activity was really starting to look unlikely. And this time of year, it's normal. We get cold fronts move through. As Julie mentioned, the sea surface temperatures cool down. Just the factors that you need for tropical development are harder to achieve this time of the year. So, but again, always want to keep your guard up, even as we go into the next. But even as we get late in the season, historically landfalls in very late November, and then certainly if we get any postseason storms, are highly, highly unlikely.
Next question's coming in here from Ashley Renee Knight from WMBB's Facebook page up there in Panama City, there on the Florida Panhandle. Hashtag Hey JB. Julie, we'll have both of you guys maybe delve into this question, but Ed, we'll come to you first. Hashtag Hey JB. Do y'all think next year could be worse? Could we top 30 named storms in 2021, Ed?
Well, I think that is a very difficult benchmark to try to repeat. I mean, again, this was unprecedented. The last time we saw anything even close to this, again, you got to go back 15 years ago. We just had a very strong La Nina pattern develop in the Pacific, and that led to this hyperactive season. can't say that next year won't be active. I think that graphic Julie said this is the 5th consecutive above normal season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, could we have another above normal season? Sure. But could the weather patterns change and could we get maybe a stronger El Nino next year, which would mean a less active season? It's possible. At this time, it's way too early to determine what could happen next season.
I kind of agree with you, Ed. Too early to say exactly, but like you mentioned, this was the most storms we've ever had in any season. So I think the odds of topping that 2 years in a row would probably be low. So I'm going to be positive and go with we're going to see less than 30, maybe only 29, but less than 30 next year.
To quote the slightly less famous JB equivalent, Justin Bieber, never say never, right? Isn't that the rule here with hurricanes? Because the moment that you say it, it's of course going to happen. So we can only hope that we break that record, Ed.
Can't believe you threw out a Bieber.
I did. If there's one episode we're going to do it on, it might be the last one here of the year. And yeah, this is likely going to be on. Listen, we could have more tropical activity here in December, and we'll keep a very close eye on the tropics here. But Wednesdays are our regularly scheduled episode. This one might be the last one for the year. And Sharon Schofield from WKRG's Facebook page, where Ed is, #HeyJulie, #HeyJB, #HeyEd. Just want to say thanks for all your hard work and happy Thanksgiving. I'd like to just take a moment to thank not just all of our meteorologists that join us here from across the country, from across Next Our Nation, but to all of our fans watching wherever you are, watching at home, our Tracking the Tropics super fans out there. We really appreciate it. Julie, Ed, this is a live stream that is all about hurricane awareness, tropical storm development. This is something where we focus on a little bit of everything when it comes to the Atlantic hurricane season, and it's been a doozy, Ed, to say the least.
Yeah, and I also want to thank all the folks who have been jumping on these Facebook lives, because obviously I think everyone's going to be sort of hyper aware. I think you guys will go into next season considering what unfolded this season, and this is just another important service to offer. I mean, it's good to kind of get into these in-depth discussions from other meteorologists, from different markets across the Southeast and along the Gulf Coast that can get in and put in their 2 cents, because we always mention with these tropical systems, predicting the paths are very difficult, but there is always some degree of unpredictability with these storms, as we found out with several of the storms this year, including Sally, which hit here, was a very slow mover, and that track just kept shifting every single update from the Hurricane Center. So, it's good to get different perspectives, and I think this is a good way to do that. I'm glad folks have been spending some time getting the perspectives from all these different meteorologists.
Julie, as we are in the Thanksgiving, build up here, any thanks to give out here as we're talking about being thankful here during the end of hurricane season?
Well, I mean, I think coming from the Tampa Bay area, we can be thankful things weren't worse for us here with the amount of storms that we've seen. The odds were probably greater that we would have seen something worse in our area. So from living here, very thankful that things weren't worse, that we only had one system that impacted us. Also very thankful, like Ed said, that there is this outlet. So during the storms, people at home can log on and get engaged and get a greater understanding of the activity in the tropics and make sure their families are prepared. So thankful for that. And then also, of course, for people like Ed and a lot of fellow meteorologists that were working all along the northern Gulf Coast. They were very, very busy this season because there's all the work that leads up to the storm. During the storm, you work very long hours. So especially Ed, grateful for you keeping all the folks in your viewing markets safe. And I know that you will be happy to hopefully rest and hopefully your weather's nice and quiet in the coming months.
Yeah, I'll be catching up on a lot of sleep for the next year, right? Considering all the sleep that we've
And lastly, also a big thank you to the NHC, the National Hurricane Center. We, of course, get so much countless information, data, models, analysis from them. So all the hard work that they do here in the state of Florida, really appreciate, of course, all the hardworking members of the National Hurricane Center, and echo what Ed was talking about earlier. Also the hurricane hunters, what they do to provide this data for us, to break it down and to provide potentially life-saving information to people. It's a big part of the mission statement that is what we base everything around here on Tracking the Tropics. So for all of our meteorologists here, a big round of applause again to the National Hurricane Center and the hurricane hunters. We have exhausted all of the Wednesdays here in the hurricane season that was 2020. That is, of course, our regularly scheduled time, Wednesdays at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. We will be doing additional streams if there is tropical development worth going live for and worth letting you know about here in the United States. But if this is our final episode here of Tracking the Tropics in 2020, thanks so much for being here with us here in your hurricane headquarters, part of Nexstar Nation, and we'll see you folks in 2021. For Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth, Meteorologist Julie Phillips, I'm JB Buno. Thanks so much. We'll see you in 2021, perhaps, next time on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.